The following audio-supported podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Please speak with your healthcare professional before making any treatment decisions. The guests on today's show were paid to participate in this podcast.
Welcome back to Thal Pals, the Alpha Beta Revolution. I'm NinaMaria Badalamenti, joined by my co-host, Dr. Kevin Kuo. Today, we're tackling some of the biggest myths and misconceptions about thalassemia. There's so many good ones that we couldn't fit them onto one single episode, so this one will be a two-parter of our myth-busting series. We'll throw out a statement and then give you guys a second to think if it's true or false, and then we'll break down together both perspectives from patient and provider on what the real answer is. Ready to get started?
Agios is a biopharmaceutical company that's fueled by connections with patient communities, healthcare professionals, patients, and each other. Building on these connections and the company's unmatched leadership in the field of cellular metabolism, Agios is pioneering therapies of genetically defined diseases, a broad group of rare and more common diseases that are typically severe and life-threatening. Near term, Agios is focusing on hemolytic and acquired anemias, including sickle cell disease, pyruvate kinase or PK deficiency, and thalassemia. To learn more, visit agios.com. That's agios.com.
Statement number 1. True or false? Everyone with thalassemia gets tired, so it's not worth bringing it up with my healthcare team. That one is false. I think this is such a good one to start with because it feels like it would have been true. Obviously, being tired and feeling fatigue is a big part of thalassemia, and many of us feel it. But just because we feel it often doesn't mean it's not important. You tell me what you think, Kevin, but I'd like to widen that even to any quote unquote abnormal feelings in your body, any kind of symptoms, even if you feel it often or want to brush it off like it's not a big deal. I think telling your doctor about it can actually give them a lot more insight into how you're doing and kind of what your care routine should look like. What do you think?
You know, Nina, I completely agree with you. Is that the reason why the statement is false is because it's definitely worth bringing up with your healthcare team. I think everyone should bring up their symptoms, no matter how little they think about it. I think it's important not to underappreciate the fatigue that someone with thalassemia feels. And the data out there supports this. We have clear data from patients all around the world. It's not just limited to one country to another, but all around the world, indicating that the fatigue that people with thalassemia experience is directly related to their hemoglobin level. And not only just the hemoglobin level, but also the type of thalassemias that they have. To not bring it up to the healthcare team, to minimize it, is definitely not the way to go, because there are things that we can do as healthcare providers working with you, with the patients, that we can help with to improve your energy level.
I think that's a good point, is that while it might be a common symptom and a normal feeling to feel tired, there are still ways to minimize that. So you might have come to terms with feeling tired often, but maybe you don't have to feel it as often or as tired once you figure out how to tackle that with your doctor. All right. Number 2, there is always a direct correlation between your hemoglobin level and how you're feeling. This one is a tricky one, and it's false. This one is my favorite because I feel tricked by it, and I've had conversations with other Thal Pals about how we might go throughout, maybe it's like towards the end of our transfusion cycle, and we're feeling really tired, or we're just not feeling ourselves, and we're like, oh, it's the hemoglobin. The hemoglobin is low. And then we go and we get our labs back, and it's like 10. And you're like, 10? I swear I was like a 9, or right? I know we've touched on this before in a past episode, but I'd love to hear the breakdown from you, Kevin, about how is that true? Because obviously hemoglobin is important and we're focused on it, but how come it's not like the exact answer of like how we're feeling?
So to all the audiences out there, to the astute ones especially, is that hey, wait a minute. Kevin just said that isn't hemoglobin related to fatigue? It is and it isn't. It's related to fatigue in a sense that with having thalassemia and anemia, not specific hemoglobin levels, but with anemia and thalassemia, that it does contribute to fatigue. Then the question comes is, how are you feeling? How are you feeling goes beyond just fatigue. There are so many things that can contribute to your fatigue, first of all. One, of course, are the biological factors. I say biological factors are things like how's your thyroid functioning? How's your mood? How's your stressors? Did you get enough sleep recently? Or maybe you have other conditions that can override that sort of fatigue in the sense that, for example, having obstructive sleep apnea. This is a real problem, especially in certain areas of the world. And obstructive sleep apnea can definitely be a huge cause of it. And when we do fix the obstructive sleep apnea, we can really change the fatigue level or how someone feels. And then, of course, in addition to all of that, is we have to recognize that intrinsically, when we measure hemoglobin, that value, even though it looks very precise, is actually not that precise. And it has to do with the machines themselves. Okay, there is an inherent variations in terms of how the machine works, and also there's inherent variations from where the blood is drawn, how the blood is drawn, how much you're hydrated, for example. Did you drink any fluid in the morning before you went for your transfusion? Things like that. And that can, of course, influence where the hemoglobin sits. I can tell you many times where I have had patients on the same day, the lab was drawn, the CBC was drawn from the same vein, from the same Luer lock on two separate occasions, and the numbers comes out differently. And that's just the natural variation that we see and the imprecision that we see with measuring hemoglobin. So if you're getting the appropriate amount of transfusions, but then you're seeing that your hemoglobin is not doing as well, don't despair, because I think the first question you have to ask yourself is, don't look at the hemoglobin yet, but just ask yourself, how are you feeling today? Are you feeling better? Or are you feeling worse? Is it because you just had an infection? Is it because you didn't sleep well the last night, etc.? Pause through those thoughts first before looking at the hemoglobin. And often another game, not game, like I guess you can call it a game, I play with my patients is, guess what your hemoglobin is
I
today?
love that game. I play that game with my dad. It's totally a game.
It's a surprise, isn't it? A lot of times.
Yeah, because you never know, but it's fun to try to like gauge. I like that tip of like gauging your body and how you're feeling before the number, and then think about the factors and then give your educated guess.
From my perspective, as a person who treat people with thalassemia, the first question I ask myself is, I'm here to treat a person. I'm not here to treat a number. So why would I look at a number? What I want to know is how a person feels in front of me.
That's why you're an amazing doctor.
That's how I approach it, at least. My turn to ask a question. So everyone with thalassemia, regardless of whether they receive regular transfusions, is at risk of developing iron overload. True or false? True.
I wouldn't have thought that. I'll be honest. I didn't know that one.
So obviously, people who are transfusion dependent get iron overload. Makes sense because each bag of blood contains around 200 milligrams of iron. Our body doesn't have any natural ability to excrete iron. It's not like we can pee out iron and we can poo out iron. I mean, there is a bit of iron in the poop actually, but don't go eating poop as iron supplements, please, guys. But there is a bit of iron in there. It's usually a milligram a day that we lose. Even in women who are actively menstruating, you're losing around 1 milligram of iron a day, in addition to that 1 milligram that you lose from your poop. So all in all, it's between 1 to 2 milligrams a day that you lose. Now, compared to 200 milligrams, that exactly is pale in comparison, right? So obviously, people with transfusion-dependent thalassemias do get iron overload. Now then the question is, what about people who don't get transfused? They're feeling okay, but a good majority of them will have some form of iron overload. And in fact, there is a study that was done for people with alpha thalassemia, specifically hemoglobin H disease. And as we all know, hemoglobin H disease, majority of patients do not need transfusions, and 20% of them have severe iron overload. Now the question is, why is that? Our body has evolutionarily been conditioned to retain iron, because you have to remember where we came from, right? As humans, we have not always lived in this sort of relative comfort. We were chased by lions, and just imagine the caveman principle. So to any anthropologists out there, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to make a mockery of your work. I'm just trying to make it a little simpler. But evolutionarily speaking, we have all came from that sort of hunter-gatherer stage where the chances of us losing blood is huge. And so the body has evolutionarily developed mechanisms to retain as much iron as possible and not to lose it. And so there's an entire recycling machinery inside our body that whenever a red blood cell breaks down, as in the case of people with thalassemia, that iron gets recycled and gets pushed back into the liver for storage and for use. So in addition to that, of course, if you're anemic, your gut will start absorbing more iron as well. So all in all, it is a net positive for people with thalassemia. So this is why you can accumulate iron over time and over the years.
Does that apply to people who don't have thalassemia too, that they retain the iron like that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So for people who don't have thalassemia, first of all, their gut doesn't absorb as much iron to begin with, because their hemoglobin is fine, and there's homeostasis, and also the recycling doesn't happen as much, because in this case, the amount of iron that you try to absorb or gain is very minimal compared to the amount of iron that you're losing as well, which is another 1 to 2 milligrams. Is exactly balanced. But for someone who is, say, having really heavy menstrual bleeding, obviously they get iron deficient pretty quickly. And it's because in that particular case, the recycling mechanism is not happening because the red cells are not breaking down, first of all, in the body. They're just losing blood externally. And second of all, the absorption mechanism can only absorb so much iron without having to take extra iron. So that's why it's a different type of scenario in that case.
Very interesting.
What about from your perspective? I want to hear from you, NinaMaria. I want to dive a little deeper. You told me that you were shocked by the fact that people who don't get transfusions also get iron overload.
Yeah, so obviously I'm only or mostly familiar with transfusion-dependent thalassemia, which I am. So from my understanding, the reason I have so much iron and need to take iron chelation is because of the extra blood that I'm getting that I need every month or every whatever weeks. For me, it's 4. So from my understanding, the iron comes from the blood that I'm receiving through transfusion. So my brain was like, oh, they don't have transfusion blood, so they don't have extra iron. I would never have imagined, I wouldn't know where that extra iron would have come from until you explained how they're keeping it.
Makes sense. Thank you. No, thank you for your perspective. So I'm going to ask the next question again. Ferritin is the only important measurement of iron overload. True or false? It's actually false. So maybe I'll start and then I'll pass it on to you, NinaMaria. So the reason why it's false is because, first of all, we have to think about where the iron resides, right? Where the iron lives. The iron doesn't live in ferritin. The iron actually, most of the iron, 80 to 90% of the iron, is locked up in the liver. That is the main storage mechanism of the liver. Of iron is in the liver. Now, the way I explain to people is that think about a school and school buses.
This is my favorite metaphor.
The liver is like a school. The ferritins are like school buses. In fact, if you actually molecularly, from micrograph, you can actually take a picture of the ferritin. It actually looks like a big ball, a hollow ball. And inside are the iron atoms. It actually sits inside this ball. And then you can think about the iron as little kids who goes to school. Now, if you want to know the number of kids in school, you don't look at number of school buses, right? Because the school bus can be totally full, can be half full, can be 20% full, can be empty. What you need to do is you need to go into school and actually look at the number of children who is sitting in classes. That's your true measurement of how many kids you have. So same as iron, you've got to go into the liver, which is like the school, to see how many kids or how much iron is in there, as opposed to just counting the ferritin, which is like counting school buses. Now, of course, then the question is, what about the heart? How do we then accurately measure the amount of iron in the heart? And truth be told, again, ferritin is not a good measure of the amount of iron in the heart. In fact, it's extremely poor. And the reason is because, first of all, it's not the school buses that are the ferritin that's delivering the iron to the heart. The iron that gets to the heart are the naked iron, we call it, the non-transferrin bound iron. How does that happen? Again, imagine that you're in a house, you're in a kitchen, and there's a kitchen sink. Imagine that the liver is your kitchen sink. When you start opening up the faucet and start filling up that kitchen, that sink, of course, the sink fills up first. And what happens if the sink is full? It spills over to the rest of the kitchen, right? That's bad. So the liver and the water is just like the iron filling up the sink. Once the sink is full, the iron that gets spilled into other organs. So what are these other organs? The heart is one, the pancreas is another. This is why people with thalassemia are prone to, especially those with iron overload, are prone to developing diabetes. It goes into a little organ that makes hormones called the pituitary inside the brain. Again, that can cause what we call hypogonadism, which is low hormonal levels for the reproductive system. So that's why it is important for everyone with thalassemia, regardless of what their transfusion status is, to have this regular monitoring for iron overload in these different organs.
I love that breakdown. Just to be clear, the iron will first be on the liver.
That's where you start. And then it starts spilling over.
Okay, and then the other organs afterwards.
Exactly. And then in case people who are really technical wondering what is the cutoff, what's the capacity of the sink, is around 7 milligram per gram of dry weight of iron. When you do the ferry scan and you do the liver iron concentration, is this 7 is that we use as a cutoff.
That's when it starts to travel to other organs. Okay. I have to admit that I was excited for this one because in a past conversation, you have used the school bus metaphor, and I think it's genius and it makes so much sense. And I love sharing that with people. So I was so excited for that one. But it also made me think, if taking the ferritin level really isn't accurate of what's right, the important part of where iron is, if it is, and where it's depositing on our organs, why do we look at ferritin?
That's an amazing question. Thank you for asking that, NinaMaria. We do it as a way to gauge whether you're continuing to load or whether you're unloading iron. It's a quick and dirty measure, right? If we can, we would love to have you go into MRI every 3 months, but I mean, that's not practical, right? In fact, that's pretty scary. It's going in there, a straight jacket, not be able to move for 20 minutes except to breathe. That's tough. And besides, MRI is just such a precious resource. It's just hard to get to begin with. It's hard to do. So a quick and dirty way for us to get a gauge of where the direction of the iron loading is. Direction is what was the key word there, right? It's not the absolute amount. It's kind of like looking at the stock market. Do you really care if the NASDAQ is above 10,000 or less than 10,000? You really don't care about that per se. What you do care about is the direction of the NASDAQ, right? Is it going up? Is it going down? So just like that, with ferritin, we're looking at the trend. Is it going up, which means you're iron loading, or is it going down, which means you're de-ironing and the chelator that you're using is working? And more importantly is that how fast it's going down and whether it is a sustained trend. Just because last month your ferritin is 3,000, now this month is 2,500. It doesn't mean that it's going down. You've got to keep looking at the next number, because if the next value, if it goes back up to 3,000, then of course you're not really having much of a change. But if it continues to go down, say down to 2,000, then obviously you're de-ironing.
So the ferritin is gauging like the iron traveling throughout your body as it's in transit to other places.
Yes, exactly.
Which is another reason the school bus is such a great representation of this. I love it. So that also reminds me that I've heard your ferritin can actually spike because of stress or other things as well. So I think that's a really interesting little tidbit that I learned along the way. And I think it just proves the fact that it's not like an exact measurement. It's more of a guide.
Yes. Oh gosh, I'm so glad you brought that up, because ferritin is so sensitive. Sometimes I joke with my patients saying that if I pinch you, your ferritin is going to jump. Not to that extent, but let's say if you have an infection, a cold, anything that's quote unquote inflammatory, it's going to cause the ferritin to go up. And again, this is why it makes ferritin unreliable. But again, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't use it. We just use it judiciously and in context of the entire picture.
So this wraps up part 1 of our myth-busting conversation on thalassemia. We covered a lot and we're just getting started, so there's a lot more to unpack in the next episode. Be sure to join us for part 2, where we'll keep on doing the true and false game and make things a little more clear about the misconceptions around living with thalassemia. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.